Good morning. Follow your dream. Today's story is about a dreamer, and I'm sure some of you know who I'm going to talk about. But let me just go back in time and bring you right up to who the speaker is. There was a man called Abraham, had a wife named Sarah, and they had a son called Isaac. Isaac had a wife called Rebecca, and they both had twins, Jacob and Esau. I'm sure you're familiar now where I'm going with this. Esau was the firstborn, and in those days, he was given the blessing or the birthright by his father. But Jacob and his mother got together and they fooled Isaac, and he believed when he gave the blessing, it was to Esau, but it was to Jacob. When Jacob came back and went to give him the blessing, he realized then that he was tricked. And Esau was very angry. So you can imagine what Esau wanted to do with Jacob. But the mother got together with Jacob again and said, go to your uncle Laban in Haran and stay there until Esau is no longer angry. And of course, Jacob went. And when he went to Haran, to his uncle, he fell in love with his uncle's last daughter called Rachel. But in those days, again, in order for a man to ask the father for his daughter, he had to pay service or give something. And we know in our days still, in our culture still, there's something called the dowry that the father has to give to the son had to give to the father to get his daughter in wedlock. So the father said, okay, but he tricked him. He said, no, you'll have to work 7 years. So that was his dowry. Jacob had to work 7 years to get Rachel. And at the 7 years, when he thought he was getting Rachel, the father tricked him again, his uncle, and gave him Leah, the oldest of his children. Leah and Jacob got together and they had 6 sons. Rachel was very distressed. But the father said to Jacob, you have to work another 7 years to get Rachel. And because he loved Rachel so much, he worked for another 7 years. And when the time came, he did get Rachel. But Rachel seemed not to be able to have children, and she was so distressed. So after a while, she said to Jacob, will you take my handmaid? And I think the name of the handmaid was Bilhah. And Jacob took Bilhah and had 2 more sons. Leah got very jealous, and she decided to offer Jacob her handmaid, which was Zilpah. And she had 2 more sons. So if you count right, that's 10 sons. So now Rachel kept praying, and eventually she was able to bear Jacob 2 sons. Joseph and Benjamin. So if you add properly, you will get 12. And remember, in the long ago, before the story came to where it is, Jacob's name was changed to Israel. And that's how you get the 12 tribes of Israel. So you know right away where the dreamer is, if you remember your Bible. Joseph became the dreamer. And that's who we're going to look at today. So we are going to discuss the story of Joseph. But before we go into it, I just want you to know that the story that I'm doing is your story as well as my story, as you will see. Whatever happens to Joseph has either happened to you or will happen. So we come now to Joseph. Joseph metaphysically means the imagination, the imaging power of the mind. So I'm going to read very quickly Genesis 37, 1 to 8. And Jacob dwelt in the land of his father, in the land of Canaan. These are the generations of Jacob. Joseph, being 17 years old, was feeding the flock with his brethren, and he was a lad with the sons of Bilhah and with the sons of Zilpah. You remember I just spoke about them? His father's wives. And Joseph brought the evil report for them unto his father. Joseph was what we call telling tales. Now Israel loved Joseph more than all his children, because he was the son of his old age. And he made him a coat of many colors. And his brethren saw that their father loved him more than all of them, and they hated him and could not speak peaceably unto him. You have to ask yourself the question, what is it with younger siblings being so favored and spoiled? I am sure I'm hitting a familiar note in some people today. This happened in Joseph's time and is still happening today. I am certain that some of us can identify with this, if not in your own family, but you might be aware of it in other families. The younger siblings seemed to be raised in a different time and environment than the older ones. I would often hear my friend who had 9 brothers and sisters, she would say by the time Ma and Pa got to the last 2, they were so tired that the last 2 got away with everything. And I know that is familiar in some families. Then you can ask yourself, why did the brothers hate him? Joseph was the favorite son of Jacob, as he was the firstborn child of the beloved wife Rachel. Jacob also made a coat of many colors. Now these things aroused the jealousy of his half-brothers, and Joseph increased their animosity later on by telling them of a dream that implied their subservience to him. And if we look at the dream was, he said unto them, I had a dream, and this dream which I have dreamed, we were binding sheaves in the field. And lo, my sheaf arose and also stood upright. And behold, your sheaves came round about and made obeisance to my sheaf. And his brethren said to him, shalt thou indeed reign over us? Or shalt thou indeed have dominion over us? And they hated him yet for his dreams and for his words. It is easy to see how sibling jealousy can arise and destroy the unity of a family. Joseph represents the faculty of imagination. This imaging faculty works even when the conscious mind is asleep and continues its activity and we have dreams. You know, you have dreams sometimes, and you may go to bed thinking, I'm not going to dream anything. But the imagination doesn't have a holiday. It works all the time. It is a very powerful activity, and we must learn to discipline the imagination if we would make it practical in serving our highest good. Now, later on in the chapter 37, Joseph dreamed yet another dream. And what did he dream? Behold, I have dreamed yet a dream, and behold, the sun and the moon and 11 stars made obeisance to me. And he told it to his father and to his brethren. And his father rebuked him and said unto him, what is this dream that thou hast dreamed? Shall I and my mother and thy brethren indeed come to bow down ourselves to thee to the earth? And his brethren envied him, but his father kept the saying in his mind. Now, later on in the chapter, after Jacob listened to what Joseph had dreamed, Jacob sent Joseph to see if the brothers were tending the flock properly. In other words, he sent him to spy on his brothers. Of course, they were supposed to be in a place called Shechem. Joseph could not find them. And as he was wandering in the field, he saw a man and asked him, who said that the brothers had left Shechem and went to Dothan. Now, when the brothers looked up and saw Joseph, they realized then that Joseph had come to spy on them. And they saw him afar off. And before he came near unto them, they conspired against him to slay him. And they said one to another, Behold, the dreamer cometh. Come now, therefore, and let us slay him, and cast him into one of the pits. And we will say, An evil beast hath devoured him, and we shall see what will become of his dreams. And there was a brother called Reuben. And when Reuben heard it, he said to them, Let us not take his life. Shed no blood. Cast him into this pit that is in the wilderness, but lay no hand upon him, that he might deliver him out of their hand to restore him to his father. The pit that Reuben, they were going to put in him, was a pit that had no water or anything in it. And Reuben thought he would be able to restore him back to the father later on. The brothers were not very pleased with Joseph's superior attitude, his tale-bearing, and the fact that their father loved Joseph better than them. You know what that did? It stirred up antagonism of the other sons toward Joseph. What happened? And we will find that again in the same chapter later on, very briefly. And it came to pass when Joseph was come into his brethren, they stripped him of his coat of many colors and cast him into the pit. The pit was empty and there was no water in it. So they didn't bother. They sat down to eat bread and, talk among themselves. And then they saw a caravan come in. And the caravan was filled with Ishmaelites. And Judah, another brother, said, What profit is it if we slay our brother and conceal his blood? Come, and let us sell him to the Ishmaelites. And they sold him to the Ishmaelites or the Midianites for 20 pieces of silver. So you see what is happening to Joseph. Joseph had a dream that he would be, if you look at it, the leader of a nation. And he never was worried about the dream. And look at the problems he's getting. And you will find out he got more problems as he's following his dream. Doesn't that happen to all of us? We have a goal or set out to do something, and don't we have obstacles coming our way? But watch Joseph and see what he did. Now, Reuben said, Don't do anything to him, shed no blood. And he came back hoping to find Joseph so he could take him back to his father. When Reuben returned, hoping to find Joseph in the empty pit, only to discover that the brothers had sold him into slavery. They then took Joseph's coat, killed a he-goat, and dipped the coat in the blood. And they brought the coat to Jacob and said, This have we found. We do not know if it's thy son's coat or not. And Jacob knew it and said, It is my son's coat. An evil beast has devoured him. And Jacob rended his garments and mourned the loss of his son. This jealousy of Joseph's brethren grew to the extent that they actually sold their own brother into slavery. Jacob, believing his son was dead, was very brokenhearted, and a lie was generated that would shame and divide the 10 brothers for the next 13 years. But no matter what evil is happening, God always provides a door to escape in spite of sinful schemes designed utterly to destroy his people. You will wonder now, well, how is this going to happen? You see, the Midianites took Joseph. That plan was necessary to separate him so that the dream could come true. And sometimes you wonder when you are looking after a dream you had in mind or a goal, and the obstacles are coming, you say, well, is this ever going to work out? But if you stick with it, you would see what happens. You have to remember, we serve a big picture God who works out all things for his children, and the most important part, in his own time. Remember, God is never late. He is always on time. How devious had the brothers become? Extreme envy and jealousy. Now we come to another part after Joseph is now sold to slavery with the Ishmaelites, and you wonder now, what's going to happen to him? Is he going to be made to do housework or whatever is going to happen to him? Joseph was brought down into Egypt by the Ishmaelites, and he was sold again into an officer of Pharaoh's, the captain of the guard, called Potiphar. So Joseph is no longer a slave by the Midianites. He is now with Potiphar in the land of Egypt. And you have to see how God was with him. Potiphar, for some reason, saw something in Joseph, and he made him overseer of everything that he had. Remember, Joseph is a dreamer and highly imaginative. We may wonder how and why Joseph became so prosperous. Though this faculty of imagination, you can project an image and it will come to pass. In other words, imagination reaches out into the unseen and about us and forms substance according to the pattern of our thoughts. And I think I could give an example of that. When I was about 7 years old, I always seemed to want to teach, and always to teach math. And my mother had these brass pots with beautiful plants in them, and her doors was painted in dark gray and light gray. And I found no other time to teach math to these invisible kids who were the brass pots, with a big black pencil, and all I taught was math. And I was very annoyed with them when they did not show their working. That is 7 years old. And I thought of it the other day, and I said, I did eventually come to be a teacher of math. And I'm still very stern. And my grandson can tell you, show your working. Show how you got your answer. So you imagine things, and then your thoughts, take them along with you, and the manifestation takes place. Don't imagine horrible things, because the subconscious mind only knows, the subconscious mind doesn't know good or bad. All it knows is if you put something there, it will manifest. So think of yourselves, think good things, imagine good all the time. And the thoughts, together with your imagination, will bring it into manifestation. This passage I just read clues us into the fact that God provides the successes we enjoy when we trust in him, no matter the circumstances. Joseph was a teenage boy, separated from his family in a strange place, thousands of miles from home. And he continued to believe in his heart, and God kept blessing him, and others noticed. Now, Joseph was now an overseer in Potiphar's house, and all that he had. Joseph was well built and handsome. And after a while, Potiphar's wife tried to persuade Joseph to lie with her, but he refused. Joseph told her, "No one is greater in the house than I am. My master has withheld nothing from me except you, because you are his wife. How then could I do such a wicked thing and sin against God? Of course, she wasn't too pleased because she was very beautiful. And who is this little teenage boy, to refuse her? But she didn't stop. She continued to harass Joseph day by day, but he refused. When you read this, you got to love Joseph, The most amazing thing about this scenario is that a teenage boy would have enough awareness of his relationship with God that he would deny his natural impulses and rely on his spiritual awareness. Think on those things. Would that happen in today's world? Don't answer. Joseph realized at a young age that immorality is a sin against God, even before it is a sin against someone else or against yourself. To maintain purity because of a relationship with the Father, rather than fear of consequence, is the highest level of nobility and morality. Now remember, Potiphar's wife is beautiful. And we found out that Joseph was handsome and well built. Potiphar's wife would not give up. She intended to fulfill her purpose, which was seducing Joseph, and he decided to fulfill his purpose as well, not giving in to her. One day, when no one was around, she caught him by his garment, saying, "Lie with me." And he fled, leaving his garment in her hand. She then called unto the men in the house and complained bitterly because she had proof. Look what he did to me. I got his garment. You know what happened? Of course, she went to her husband. When his master heard the story his wife told him, and she said to him, "This is how your slave treated me," he burnt with anger. Joseph's master took him and put him in prison, the place where the king's prisoners were confined. Again, Jehovah was with Joseph and gave him favor in sight of the keeper of the prison. The keeper of the prison committed to Joseph's hand all the prisoners that were in the prison. Now, he was a slave, and he did a wrong thing according to Potiphar by going with his master's wife. Normally, a slave would have been executed for such an accusation, but instead, he was put into prison. And not only put into prison, he was given the other prisoners to look over, to be in charge of. Isn't that the Spirit of the Lord? Because he's a slave, did the worst thing you can, and yet he was not executed. Now, while he was in prison, he met two people, the king's butler and the baker. And they were put into prison. And they had a dream. The chief butler had a dream. I'm not going to read you everything because it would take till tomorrow. And you don't want to be here, neither do I. But briefly, you will be able to read it yourself. And it is all in chapter 40. And just briefly to give you the dream, the chief butler dreamt, a vine was before me, and in the vine were 3 branches, and it was though it budded, and its blossoms shot forth, and the clusters therefore brought forth ripe grapes, and Pharaoh's cup was in my hand, and I took the cup and pressed them into Pharaoh's cup, and I gave the cup into Pharaoh's hand. That was the dream. And Joseph said, the 3 branches, he interpreted the dream. The 3 branches represent that in 3 days, you will be restored to your office as chief butler. Joseph asked him to please remember him when he's back in office. He said, I've done this for you, and when you get there, don't forget me. The baker came up with his dream. And what did he dream? And behold, 3 baskets of white bread were on my head. And in the uppermost basket there was of all manner of baked food for Pharaoh, and the birds did eat them out of the basket upon my head. Joseph said, in 3 days you shall be hung on a tree, and the birds will eat of your flesh. Just as Joseph predicted, it happened. The baker was restored to his position, and the butler was restored to his position, and the baker was killed. Well, you know what happens. Chief butler didn't have any time with Joseph. He got back his job, and he forgot everything about Joseph. And this happens in our everyday life. So what happened now to Joseph? 2 years after this took place, Pharaoh had a dream. And Pharaoh dreamed that there were 7 cows, fat and rosy looking, well fed. And he dreamed about 7 other cows. They were lean and haggard looking. And in the dream, the thin cows ate up the fat cows. So Pharaoh called for all. He had another dream, same time. And this time was ears of corn. Had 7 ears of corn, looking very nutritious, and you could believe it. You know, when you have plants, they're growing lovely. And he also dreamt about 7 thin ones. And what happened? The thin ones swallowed up, with the east wind swallowed up the fat ones. So Mr. Pharaoh called in all the magicians. Nobody could interpret the dream. Then a light went off in the butler's head, and he remembered Joseph. And he told Pharaoh, when I was in prison, this is what happened and this is it. And Pharaoh was so pleased, he sent to call Joseph. So Joseph comes out and interprets the dream. And the 7 years where the cows were fat and lovely, and there were one dream, the cows and the corn, similar dream. He said it's one dream. And those 7 years will be 7 years of plenty. We'll have abundance in your country like you never had it before. And the 7 thin cows will be 7 years of famine, when nobody will have any food. So Pharaoh was upset and wanted to know, what can I do? And you can read it for yourself in chapter 41. How Joseph told him, you can get some overseers, and he explained to him, get barns and we will store. When it's good years, we'll store the food. And then when the 7 years come, we'll have enough and more to give to the people. Pharaoh was so pleased. Hear what happens again. Remember, we just heard he was put into the prison and was in charge. Now hear what happens. He was put now in the charge of the whole land of Egypt, because he said, who is the person I can get to do all this? And Joseph was the person. And Pharaoh was so pleased. He put a signet ring on his finger, fine linen, gold chain around his neck, and had him ride in a chariot as his second in command. And people shouted before him, make way. So you can imagine now, Joseph has arrived. Joseph's gift of interpreting dreams finally came back to bless him. After 13 years of slavery and prison, Joseph emerged as the number 2 man in all of Egypt, the world's superpower at that time. Not bad for a boy who thought dead by his father. God works things out in his own time, his own timetable, to bring the best results for us too. Now, what do you think happened? During the years of famine, the land of Canaan, nobody had food. So Joseph's 10 brothers came from Canaan to buy grain in Egypt. They came twice, and it's a long story. What happened? It's beautiful. You can read it. He could have told them off. He knew who they were, but they didn't recognize him. But he played tricks on them. And you will read how he took Benjamin, which was the last son, and he took Judah, and Jacob was wroth that his children were gone, and he did a lot of things, but not evil. And eventually, when he could do it no more, he said to them, "Come close to me. I am your brother Joseph, the one you sold into Egypt. Do not be distressed and angry for selling me here, because it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you." So when things don't go as you will, don't give up. There's a reason for it happening. God sent me ahead of you to save your lives by a great deliverance. What can we learn from this lesson? The cleansing power of forgiveness and trust in God was displayed by Joseph in spite of his powerful position. You know what he could have done? He could have all of them killed because he was second in command. And whatever he did, Pharaoh was so happy that he could move the world and Pharaoh wouldn't say anything. He could have gotten full revenge for his brother. But instead, he told them not to be angry with themselves for what they had done. What did Joseph do? He gave grace over vengeance. He gave unconditional love over revenge. Think about it. It's the best thing we can do to be like our divine maker. I could tell you, sometimes when I was growing up, and not before I came into this teaching, revenge was sweet. I had a PhD in revenge. I used to feel you did me something, I have to hurt you back. But what I realized, you trying to hurt somebody back, they are on their merry way having a ball, and you are carrying them on your back like Atlas. Think about it. Sometimes, we maybe want to revenge people, but think of the love of God. If God would revenge us for the things that we have done, there would be nobody here this morning. Joseph's story is our story. He was a dreamer. We are all dreamers. But he never let the obstacles he met prevent him from giving up on his dream. He trusted in God implicitly. He used all the obstacles as stepping stones to greater heights. And as our minister always says, there are no difficulties, there are no challenges. It's just stepping stones to success. And think of it. When you have a bad experience and you learn from it, isn't it a good lesson? So the bad experiences, if you want to call them bad, are good. And you have to remember, there's a saying, my mother used to say, out of evil cometh good. And in the bulletin, it's quoted Genesis 50:20. Joseph said, "But as for you, you thought evil against me, but God meant it for good." I want to leave with you a very, very known passage in Proverbs 3:5. You know it. "Trust in the Lord with all thine heart, and lean not to thy own understanding. In all thy ways acknowledge him, and he will direct thy path." Let us take an example from Joseph and follow the Lord's way. It is the only way. And the obstacles that come your way, tell them, get thee hence, because you serve a divine God and a divine presence that will restore you to all the wonderful things in life. God bless you all abundantly.
I can see clearly now, the rain is gone, and I can see all obstacles in my way. You can clap or snap. Gone are the dark clouds that had me blind. It's gonna be a bright, 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 sunshiny day. It's gonna be a bright, 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 sunshiny day. Oh yes, I can make it now. The pain is gone, and all of the bad feelings have disappeared. Here is that rainbow I've been praying for. It's gonna be a bright, 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 sunshiny day. Look all around, there's nothing but blue skies. Look straight ahead, there's nothing but blue skies. Eyes. Woo, made it. I can see clear.